Welcome to Unconscious Bias in Leadership Training. I'm Sravanthi Vallampati, and I will be your facilitator today. To help set stage for our session, imagine these scenarios. Scenario 1. You are at an undergraduate commencement ceremony. Caps are flying high, and you see a sea of happy faces as the dean welcomes the valedictorian to address the gathering. Scenario 2. There is an emergency medical decision that is to be made for your sibling, and you hear the critical course of action coming from a doctor with a thick, unfamiliar accent. Scenario 3. You are at a tech startup, and the interviewee in front of you is a sharp, perfect fit for the job, pregnant, 24-year-old female. Scenario 4. You turn the TV on, and there is news about a hit and run, and the reporter says the suspect has been identified. Scenario 5. You receive requests from 2 team members asking to attend a human resources convention, and you have budget remaining to send only one this quarter. Scenario 6. Your high school senior comes home and talks about his Asian classmate getting offer letters from all universities to which he had applied, including 2 Ivy Leagues. Scenario 7. You are in a Toastmasters meeting, and you see on the agenda that the speaker whose speech you are assigned to evaluate today is the chief executive officer of a real estate chain about whom you have recently read in the CEO magazine. Scenario 8. You are an avid sports fan, and your favorite sport is basketball. You're in charge of facilitating a brainstorming session to gather ideas for a team builder event at work. Now let's take a few moments to examine these 8 scenarios and what your brain expected to see, hear, receive, conclude, or do as it encountered them. Did you expect most of the graduating class to be around the ages of 22 to 26, or the valedictorian to be of a certain race or gender? In case of the doctor with the thick, unfamiliar accent, did you doubt his competence or wish to seek a second opinion? Did you wonder if the sharp, perfect fit for the job, pregnant 24-year-old female would soon be on maternity leave and that your project timeline would be in jeopardy? Did you imagine the suspect the police just apprehended belonged to a certain social class or race? Was your decision of the candidate for the Human Resources Convention based on the team member's gender identity or gender expression? Did you say, or at least think, of course he did, when you heard about the Asian student receiving offer letters from all the universities to which he had applied? Were you disappointed that the prepared speaker at your Toastmasters meeting, the CEO, had more likes and you-knows than you expected and did not do so well in hiding his nervousness? And finally, did you somehow encourage more conversation around team builders related to sports? Whatever your reaction, it was valid, given what you knew, what you understood, what you believed, and how you applied the 3 to arrive at a conclusion. In every one of these cases, especially as they came at you quickly, your brain made connections. It relied on the intel it had gathered over time from observation, personal experience, social contracts, cultural influences, research, media, and countless other sources to make sense of the information, to help you get to the next step, whether an aha, a decision, a judgment, or an action. What's astonishing is the pace at which it did it. You, me, and everyone around us are very similar in this way, in how we unconsciously arrive at our ahas, decisions, judgments, and actions. Unconsciously being the key word here. If you think about it, your conclusion to any one of these scenarios could be as close to or as different from mine or anyone else's. You could have felt one way about the doctor with the thick accent, and I another. You might have offered the sharp, perfect fit for the job, pregnant 24-year-old female the job, while I may not have. You may have said, "Of course he did," when you heard about your son's classmate, while I may not have because I am Asian, and I know for a fact that not every Asian gets into all of their dream schools. Now, we may never know if our ahas, decisions, judgments, and actions were right, fair, democratic, objective, sensitive, etc. But what we do know is this: that our feelings and thoughts manifest without our conscious knowledge, the conscious knowledge of the individual exhibiting them. As such, bias is implicit within them. It denotes people's unconscious attitudes and associated prejudices towards specific people or groups. In our time together today, we will talk about unconscious bias, what it is, how it plays out, reasons why it is important, and how, by leaning into it more, we can stay aware of our thoughts, feelings, and actions at all times. In addition, we will focus on how we can be better leaders as we manage our own biases and affect productive outcomes for all within and beyond Toastmasters. If we believe leadership is all about influence and influence creates positive impact, then we must also believe that there is every reason for us to dive deep into this subject. Before we begin defining unconscious bias and dive deeper, I invite you to hear one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Jennifer Eberhard, a social psychologist. "Whether you like it or not," says Dr. Eberhard, "if you have a brain, you have bias." With that understanding, let's get started. Unconscious bias is talked about and referred to synonymously in various ways, such as implicit bias, cognitive bias, social prejudice, and implicit social cognition. Note that we will do the same throughout this session. The first use of the term implicit bias or unconscious bias is attributed to psychologists Mazarin Banaji and Anthony Greenwald, who argued that social behavior is largely influenced by unconscious associations and judgments. To steer clear of inaccurate interpretations, let's look at a few definitions of unconscious bias. According to the Office of Diversity and Outreach at the University of California, San Francisco, unconscious biases are social stereotypes about certain groups of people that individuals form outside of their own conscious awareness. Everyone holds unconscious beliefs about various social and identity groups, and these biases stem from one's tendency to organize social worlds by categorizing. The Ivy Academy defines it as follows. Unconscious bias, also known as cognitive bias, refers to how our mind can take shortcuts when processing information. The Oxford Dictionary says, any distortion of experience by an observer or a reporter of which they are not aware. Now that we have defined unconscious bias or implicit bias, it may help to understand the types of biases that exist. Broadly, bias or preference is categorized as explicit or implicit. Explicit bias refers to the bias that we are aware of at a conscious level. For example, feeling threatened by another group and delivering a hate speech as a result. Implicit bias, also known as unconscious bias, as we have learned, refers to attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious way, making them difficult to control. Let's look at Toastmasters, for example. 3 guests attend your Toastmasters meeting, but you approach only one of them, one who looks like, speaks like, and perhaps dresses like you, even though the other 2 smile and wave at you just as eagerly. That is unconscious or implicit bias at play. On the other hand, you know one of the guests is a better speaker than you are because he won the area contest just last week at a contest where you were also a contestant. You feel threatened by him and do not want to make conversation. You walk right past him to greet the other two guests, although they walk in together and smile and wave at you just as eagerly. That bias is conscious. Whether at a Toastmasters meeting, your workplace, home, or in the community, implicit and explicit biases are at play all the time. Due to the enormity of implicit bias discrimination that exists, it would be well worth our time to explore some common manifestations of unconscious or implicit bias. Racial bias is when we might remove the acknowledgement of a person's skin color and invalidate their racial, ethnic, and cultural identity, which can be an important part of their lived experience. Gender bias, also referred to as sexism, where we might favor one gender over another. LGBTQ plus bias, when we might assume a person is in an opposite sex relationship to imply those relationships are the norm and exclude people in the same sex or other types of relationships or those who aren't in a relationship at all. Affinity bias, where we might favor those who have similar interests or backgrounds as us. Confirmation bias, where we might tend to interpret and recall information that confirms pre-existing beliefs and values. Disability bias, where we might overlook the needs of a disabled person or ignore them. Halo effect, when we might allow one quality to dictate an overall positive impression of someone or something. Horn's effect, the opposite of halo effect, where we might have a negative impression of someone based on one trait or experience. Ageism, when we might discriminate because of someone's age. Conformity bias, similar to groupthink, when we might change our opinions or behaviors to match that of a bigger group, even if they don't reflect our own opinions. Anchor bias, on the other hand, when we overly rely on the first piece of information we receive as an anchor upon which to base our decision making. Affect heuristic, when we might depend on our emotions to make decisions. For a comprehensive list of biases, you may want to look at research by resources like asana.com, among others like psychologytoday.com, and many other university resources online. Let's take 2 minutes to jot down our thoughts, some familiar areas of unconscious bias, and examples from our lived experiences. After this reflection, or at any time during this session, feel free to pause to reflect, research more, or get together with team members to enhance your individual and shared learning. We'll have 2 minutes. Welcome back. As you reflected, you have probably realized a few things. That we all have unconscious biases, whether we admit to having them or not, and that our everyday encounters expose us to them, both positive and negative, in wholesale and random fashions. That common stereotypes like race, gender, age, nationality, and skin color are easily visible, while others like region, religion, beliefs, values, education, upbringing, political views, etc., are not, because they stay below the waterline of visibility, if we are using an iceberg as a metaphor for what is and isn't visible at first glance. That the hidden, nuanced nature of these biases and their effect on us and those around us are truly what make it difficult to understand and tedious to address and correct. Here, it is important to understand that not all unconscious biases are bad. To help explain, consider that the human brain processes 11 million bits of information every second. Our minds, however, can only handle 14 to 60 bits of that, which means that most of our work the brains do is propelled by the unconscious bitwise connecting of these dots. This mechanism is critical to our functioning in simple and complex situations. Our brains accomplish this by creating mental shortcuts every day by seeking out patterns to group, categorize, and process the enormous continents of information to which they are exposed. Without these shortcuts, we'd have to spend unimaginable amounts of time to figure out even simple things like throwing in a load of laundry, opening a door, complimenting someone for a job well done, or flipping a pancake. It is through this automatic cognitive process every single one of us develops preferences or biases. What makes this realm of the unconscious or implicit bias complex is its manifestation. Unconscious biases manifest in such subtle, unrecognizable ways, at least to an untrained eye or an unaware mind, that when left unattended can cause serious ramifications. As we have learned, our brains are pattern and shortcut-seeking machines that thrive on familiar content and its dynamics. Therefore, it takes intentional work, deliberate choices to leave that familiar comfort of unconsciously repeating cycles, especially when people are involved. The diversity of humanity makes this subject enormously complex. For example, it's easy to sort objects. We organize them by form, function, source, or pattern, and categorize and recategorize them as needed. However, it's not so easy when it comes to people. Think of men and women, for example, and some of the stereotypes or labels we are accustomed to giving them based on the patterns we recognize and how it may affect the outcomes if our actions towards them are driven solely by these labels. We think of men as assertive, strong, driven, taking charge, and leading, and women as helpful, supportive, sensitive, and taking care. This simple example leads us to some, if not all, critical questions we must ask ourselves. What if our biases were limiting us from being our authentic selves, from reaching our potential, or helping others do the same? What if we were unintentionally excluding some people or groups? What if our actions or decisions are leading to negative, irreversible outcomes? To be our authentic selves, stewards of inclusive leadership, it is imperative for us to understand the importance of recognizing and embracing diversity, practicing inclusion intentionally, and striving for equity. As leaders, we have the responsibility to ask questions such as these of ourselves and others, welcome conversation and debate, and continuously iterate through the process, defining and refining our understanding to slowly but surely move towards conscious action to feel empowered and empower others along the way. Blessing Omakwu, a leader in many a worldwide organization who furthers initiatives in our area of interest, rightly remarks, to have biases is to be human. It's what we do with them that matters. While it may sound like we're oversimplifying a very complex subject, we must recognize that it is true that confronting bias starts with simply recognizing that we all have it and then moving forward. So, what can we do about it, you ask? Well, let's take some more time to reflect. We know that with awareness that we have created for ourselves over our lifetimes, and especially thus far in this session, we can come up with a few approaches and action items to mitigate the negative effects of unconscious biases and accelerate the enhanced creation of productive teams, inclusive societies, and empowered cultures. Now is as good a time as any to take that first step. As a reminder, after this reflection or at any time during the session, please feel free to pause to reflect, research more, or get together with a team member to enhance your individual shared learning. In the 2 minutes that we have, please think about and jot down what you can do as a leader to address unconscious bias and social stereotypes. Welcome back. Please save your reflections to add to the list that we will review soon. To strengthen your reflection of how leaders can handle their own biases and empower others to do the same, let's explore further. Unconscious bias in leadership causes leaders to categorize, compare, and make assumptions that reinforce their own, often unintentional favoritisms, preconceptions, and prejudices, as well as common stereotypes. Leadership bias creates judgment errors that affect leaders' ability to make and support decisions, influence thoughts and outcomes, include and recognize others, and give and receive feedback, among many. A case in point, applicable beyond academia, is a study published by the faculty at Harvard University that elucidates explicit and implicit biases and the effect on how we view ourselves and others and how we make decisions. Perhaps most disturbing finding may be that implicit biases can be at odds with our own conceptions of ourselves and our conscious values and standards. A good deal of evidence from the behavioral sciences, some of it conducted on university professors themselves, demonstrates that actual achievements are often set aside in favor of those who fit some group or stereotype of those likely to succeed. Project Implicit, hosted at Harvard, includes dozens of online IATs or implicit association tests that allow us, in the privacy of our own homes and offices, to explore our implicit biases. In a sense, leaders who understand and acknowledge the existence of unconscious or implicit bias can continuously learn, create awareness, and actively engage those who may be at the receiving end of such biases and stereotypes. From simple conversations to advocacy and sponsorship, the range of activities is limited only by the capacity we leaders create and the commitment we show. Why address unconscious bias, you ask? Well, because leaving it unaddressed can negatively impact the development continuum of individuals, teams, and for and not-for-profit entities alike. When addressed, on the other hand, it enables us to not only rise above our limiting beliefs and behaviors, but also lift others as we go. Wherever we are, we can become those multipliers who help attract diverse talent, create a culture of inclusion and belonging, encourage creativity and innovation, elevate levels of productivity, improve engagement, increase customer base or membership and revenue, and reduce attrition, and most of all, enhance trust and enhance brand value. A McKinsey study found that gender-diverse companies were 21% more likely to gain above-average profitability. A report by Boston Consulting says that diverse teams bring over 20% higher innovation revenue. Inclusive teams with equitable leadership practices made better business decisions 87% of the time. All of these statistics are but a reflection of enhanced brand value, whether for an individual team member, a leader, or for a nonprofit or for-profit entity. Without some explicit takeaways or action items, all our learning would seem like a ton of theory. To unpack the potential of our learning and our lived experiences to drive positive change, we must develop action plans and models rooted in some fundamental hows. While not all-encompassing, this list, in addition to the one you made during your second reflection time, can be a formidable tool for you. Acknowledge that unconscious biases exist within all of us. Adjust your perspective. Look beyond your own point of view. Continuously deepen your understanding of diversity, inclusion, and equity. Explore your own cultural diversity lens and how it shapes the way you see the world and interact with others. Learn how unconscious bias can cause you to misunderstand, misjudge, and exclude others. Make inclusive language part of your everyday vocabulary. Recognize the many ways unconscious bias can manifest. Stay aware of your bias blind spots at all times and check in often. Know that it is a process that involves intentional learning and unlearning. And last but not least, have the courage to interrupt bias when it happens. As you look at applying these concepts to your Toastmasters experience, please reflect on the implicit diversity and incredible exposure to human library that you have within Toastmasters. Appreciate the framework of inclusivity that is built into our education and leadership programs, and leverage the abundant opportunities that are built into making the environments into which we lean in to learn, grow, and lead that much more supportive. Do not be afraid to confront your own unconscious biases while recognizing those in others. I know we all can help others as much as we can help ourselves. In closing, If I can leave you with one thought that is more valuable than anything else you may have learned today, it is this: you hold the power to accept, stay aware, and hold yourself and others accountable for the positive change you wish to see in the world, a world that is equitable for all. While our work may never be done, our contributions will make the machine as robust as it can ever be. With engagement and empathy, and by bringing them into our consciousness, we can break these cycles of unconscious bias. I so appreciate you taking the time to learn unconscious bias as part of your leadership journey within and beyond Toastmasters. I welcome your feedback. Please write to me at svallampati@gmail.com to help my own research and learning. Thank you.